Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Is everybody still awake? We're all here in the room. Mulwaney, have I anybody who can respond to me in the room? Hey, hello, Eastern Cape. Oh, and Western Cape, okay. So I'm basically based in Eastern Cape, which when I come to Stellenbosch I say is another country, but I'm at Rhodes University. And I also happen to be on the council of AISA. We have a little English Afrikaans distinction in the way we pronounce the organization name. We're already intercultural at the outset. So the International Education Association of South Africa, it's actually registered as an NPO, and it was initially set up just after democracy in South Africa by many of the registrars and DVCs in South African public higher education institutions. And it was set up because suddenly we had international staff and students and visitors wanting to come and engage with higher education in South Africa. Meanwhile, many of the vice-chancellors were very busy with the increasing access to education, very much embroiled in kind of the domestic expansion of higher education. So we interestingly had this partnership with with the organization that was initially all just VCs, and over the years it emerged into HISA and is now more recently called USAF, University South Africa. So AISA has had this hand-in-glove partnership with USAF over the years, and really has been the organization where all the issues affecting internationalization and affecting mobility have sat within the AISA organization. And the people who drive it are very much the directors from international offices across the universities. And we were very delighted to support, and congratulations on the acquisition of the chair of intercultural competencies to both Sarah and Orla and Stellenbosch. We were very happy to support this because, of course, you know, coming from the context, we as AISA have very much been a group of people that put a lot of voluntary effort into building bridges and developing intercultural competency within South Africa. And we very much see ourselves as a united front for South Africa when we represent South African higher education internationally in conferences and on the various platforms, which is where we would have met people like Orla and so on. I also just want to acknowledge that I have another council member from AISA in the room here, Professor Judy Peters, who's just sitting there second from the back. Just give a little wave. So Judy just joined our council this year, and in fact we are collaborating with AIEA, of whom Orla is the executive director, on a global leadership summit in international education, which will be held on August the 22nd in Durban, just before the AISA conference, which is our first face-to-face gathering since COVID. So already I am starting to illustrate some of the ways in which we partner, in which we collaborate, and how we network at national and international level. And of course, we couldn't represent ourselves if there wasn't core competency on intercultural competence amongst ourselves. I think most of the South Africans in the room will agree that in spite of all the efforts of transformation, you know, there are still challenges within each institution to truly incorporate and represent the diversity of South Africa. Geographically, people still live in quite separated areas. Their education in primary and high school can often still be quite, you know, amongst their own community, wherever that might be and whoever that might be. In urban areas, a little less so. There's a little bit more kind of mixing of neighborhoods and, you know, more proximity and access to get to know people. But unless you are very intentional about getting to know people who are different from the people you automatically, coincidentally happen to be born among, it doesn't happen necessarily very naturally. There's still very few spaces. So one thing about developing intercultural competency within the South African context is you've got to be very intentional about it. You've got to be very explicit about it. It doesn't just happen. You must make spaces. So one of my kind of key messages is about the need to create new spaces. And then I just would like to kind of use an example. I think, have I covered enough on these? Sorry. I wanted to use the example of how we do that at one university. So the university where I am located, which is Rhodes University, it is quite a, it's a close-knit university. There's only 8,000 students. We're on a very open campus that is very integrated with our town. Community engagement is a huge part of the ethos of the university. And we have, because of the proximity, you can literally be doing community engagement programs within 5 minutes of leaving the campus. Unlike, for example, if you have to travel from a centre of a big city and it might take you half the day to go out there to an area where you may do community engagement, and then you come back and you almost have to dedicate a day. So we can integrate it very much into the daily life of the university. And basically it is hugely important. The university is very aware, because of this proximity and this symbiotic relationship with the local community, which we have, people are very aware of the need to be interculturally aware. Now, they may not use that language. In fact, they don't really use that language. But there is a real awareness of who is privileged, who is not, and the responsibility the privileged have to the underprivileged. From my location in the university, I sit in the international office. So I am very concerned with how the international community fits into that whole environment that is very, very preoccupied with its own locality. And how do we make sure that there is a space and an integration and inclusivity of these people? And most of the students and staff that I engage with are coming from the rest of the African continent. And I just wanted to use an example of, we have these extracurricular activities, and we try to create spaces that are slightly different to those that are owned by different entities within the university. Everyone has their own space. If someone's doing a particular activity, you're likely to attract certain people to it, if it's one of the traditional South African social activities. So we try to create new spaces that aren't actually already pre-owned by any group, and then we try to invite everybody into those spaces. And I think that is a really important principle of change. I don't feel it's a good use of time to try and change people, change the things people are used to doing. Rather give an alternative option of creating a new space into which people can go into. So for example, just for Women's Day, we did an open mic session in collaboration with the Department of English Literature. So this is live from last Thursday, Friday night. And we had a visiting professor from Togo who is actually an African author. And we decided we would focus on African poetry, African authors, and we would go into the space. But again, quite a lot of the literature department were quite surprised when this French-speaking author came and read her poetry in French. And it was, it had to be translated. But what was quite interesting was the commentary afterwards. Gosh, now we know what it feels like if someone doesn't speak English as a first language. So this is like a small thing, but these are the spaces where people can begin to increase their own self-awareness, and they begin to increase empathy for other people. So I think by doing things, this is how you can develop those self-aware, questioning things that need to happen if you want to develop intercultural competency. I think then the last thing I just wanted to talk about was living intercultural competency. And I just wanted to share a little from my own experience. So in my household, my partner and I are from two different cultures, two different countries. We had two children in a third country, and we currently live with a long-term friend who is from another culture. So on a daily basis, it can be hectic. On a daily basis, around the table, the food we're choosing to eat, the way we're eating the food. We have intercultural conversations just as an integrated part of living our lives. And so we also will find some people will say, oh, why are you eating that like that? Or why are you doing this like this? And there is just this continuous learning. So I think that if we can encourage our students and the people we work with to be open to just engaging in trusted environments around a meal. Ask people when someone passes away, talking about the rituals. Why do people do the meanings of that? Birth, death, and marriage are a great way to understand cultures. Passage, or what's it, rites of passage. When you begin to engage with people about that, it's amazing the wealth of understanding and learning you can develop. And then if you just start small in your own life with those open spaces, those, openness to the ideas and openness to the engagement, you, as I think Darla said, it's a lifelong journey. You never stop learning. And in fact, the more you build that into your practice, the more and more curious you become, and the more and more opportunities you find come your way to build and build and build and build on your own intercultural competence. So I think that we're looking forward to the work, the more theoretical and the more practical, and hopefully the more partnerships. But then we also have to take it to the personal. And that's a hard thing, and it requires trust. And so I think if we can all become builders of trust and circles of trust in our own lives, in our own institutions, in our own offices, in our own workplaces, that is how we will start to build towards a better future. What was the theme of this? A better future globally. We're going to start personally in our families, in our offices, with our communities, and those are the building blocks on which we can build towards a better global future. I'll end there. Thank you.